Well, welcome to our homeschool interviews. I am Melissa Webb, and today I am very happy and proud to be spending some time with Jessica Galasso, who is a homeschooling mom who has some experience behind her and some, I think, hope and encouragement for many of us out there who have heard all of those homeschooling misconceptions. We're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive today and talk about that. But before we even do so, Jessica, I would love it if you would tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Jessica Galasso. I have three kids. One just turned 10. I have a 7-year-old, and then I have a 4-year-old who will be joining me in my homeschool next year. So he will be in TK, and I will have a 2nd grader and a 5th grader to teach next year. And we are homeschooling through a homeschool charter. And we are out in Santa Clarita, California. And we've been homeschooling for 2 years now. So I started when my middle child was going into kindergarten. She had finished TK, and then my oldest child was going into 3rd grade.
So if you had a child already going into 3rd grade at that point, you'd already been in the public school system, like brick and mortar classroom-based learning?
Yes. So my oldest went to kindergarten and 1st grade, and then in 2nd grade, half the school year because of the pandemic interruption, right? So she did finish out 2nd grade, but half of it was in school, half of it was Zoom learning. And it was bouncing back and forth between my 2nd grader and my TKer with a 2-year-old at the time. I think it was 2. It was like, I can't do this for another year, for a whole year. Yeah, that's kind of where the decision process started to unfold.
So this wasn't an all-time dream of yours from the time you were a little girl. You were like, I'm going to grow up and be a homeschool mom.
No. Before I got married, I was in film school. I was going to be a screenwriter, and I still enjoy writing. Don't get me wrong. I really enjoy it. But after we had our first child, my husband still works in film and television. But it was just, the hours are brutal and I couldn't do it. We couldn't have 2 parents doing it. It was just not working for me. So I ended up doing a few other jobs, but eventually ended up substitute teaching for elementary school. And I loved it. I loved the inspiration that the children gave me and that I felt I could give to the children. And I was studying for my master's when COVID happened. And right as we had finished my student teaching is when they shut the schools down. So the idea was, because I was in and out of the classroom, my kids' classrooms, the teachers that my children had they were actually retiring. And they said, we will hand you our classroom because we like you. We think you've got what it takes, whatever. We will give you our classroom, basically, if possible. We're retiring. We'll put in a good word, whatever needs to be, we will be in your corner. So I actually thought, okay, so this is my path. This is where we're going. I'm going to get a job at the school my children work at. Hopefully I will be teaching there. I'll be with my kids. And this will be my job. And then when they shut the schools down, I realized, I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I want to be given a classroom a year after all these children were at home, and I saw what was happening with my own children. And so I said, okay, well, I'll just give myself a little time to figure it out. And I enrolled them for the following year. And when we went to pick up our supplies, the day before school started, I kind of felt like I was sold a bill of goods that wasn't quite true. They had said, well, you have this homeschooling option where you can homeschool at home through the district, and we'll give you homeschooling materials, and then you just check in with a person and it'll be fine. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great, because I just went through all of this. I was student teaching in 3rd grade. I'm like, I could do this. I'm gonna have a 3rd grader, and TK is not that far removed from kindergarten. Like I'm set up for this. So I'll just homeschool them at home through the district. And they gave me, like, they gave me the kind of curriculum you would use in a whole group situation. And I was like, wait, why are you giving me this? And they said, well, first we're going to do distant learning. You'll have a teacher with a classroom, a digital classroom. And then when the school's open, then your children will be moved to homeschooling. And I was like, no, I can't. I need consistency. I can't, even if it's consistent chaos at home, I'll take it over this like back and forth, open, not open. I couldn't. So I pulled them from the school the next day and I said, okay, let's do this. I had the resources because I had student taught the year before. So I did have a lot of stuff from being in a third grade classroom, but I also really, I had like friends who had homeschooled and they were like, if you need anything, you let us know. And I'm like, no, I think I got this, but I did check in with them. Like, look, I don't know what to do. And they were like, just start signing up for charter schools. So I started putting in our name in the sort of hat for charter school. And we had 3 charter schools that we were hoping to get into. And we started schooling in August, went all through August. In mid-September, I started getting these like sort of rejection emails like, oh, we're too full. I'm really sorry. And I think I know I got 1 for sure, maybe 2. And I remember going to bed that night and thinking, I said a prayer. Then I said, Lord, okay, if this is what I'm supposed to do, just give me like the peace of mind that this is the way it is. Like, then I'll be fine. And I'll just head down. I'll just get through this year and then we'll see. And then the next morning we had in my inbox from Sky Mountain that we had gotten in, and there were 2 spots for the girls. And I was like, great. So
don't you love clarity like that? Like that's just like the best clarity. Like, thank you so much. I was doubting, but now I'm good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was your husband on board? Was your family on board? Were the kids on board at that point? Just curious.
I mean, the kids didn't really have a choice because I said, well, your choices are you can learn online, which they both were just miserable learning from the computer. I said, or we could try this thing. And if you guys don't like it, we'll just do it for a year. But right now our choices are you learn online or
all
you
day
learn with
long.
me. And I promise I'll make it fun. I'm like, I promise we'll go take field trips. We'll do stuff. Right. Well, okay. But COVID like shut all that down. Right. So that made it a lot harder because we just really couldn't go a lot of places.
Right.
So that year was tough. And I have heard the first year homeschooling is really challenging because you're all trying to just get your bearings.
Yes.
And a bit of advice that I was given and I would pass on to others was give yourself that year to just just be nice to yourself because your children are figuring it out. You're figuring it out, but it does get easier. And I will say this going into this 3rd year, I'm excited. Like I wasn't super excited last year because it was such a rough first year. And then by the middle of the second of last year, I was like, this is good. Like we've kind of getting into a rhythm. I kind of understand like when my children need a break or when they're hungry or when they're just wanting a snack because they don't want to do the math or whatever it is that they're doing. And so I started to get into a rhythm and because, you make mistakes, you're like, okay, well, we're just gonna, whatever it is. Well, I need to go find a marker and then everything falls apart and you're like, come back to this table and like your kids are gone and you're like, well, oh no. So now I've learned sort of lessons along the way that by this year, I'm like, oh, I know not to make those mistakes that will frustrate me or will frustrate my kids.
Well, and I'll tell you, I felt the same way when going from classroom teaching and then homeschooling. We ended up homeschooling 2 of our 3 boys. Again, accidentally. I never thought I was going to homeschool, but everything lined up that's exactly what I was supposed to do. And I remember that first year, and this is where I think teachers have a little bit of a disadvantage than the homeschool mom who doesn't have that credential, that background of how you teach to a group, because it is a different mindset. And the way that I was going at the school year, like trying to make it fit the classroom environment, I've apologized to my kids.
Yeah,
I
Melissa, I
have to.
we absolutely went through that same mistake. So I was a fresh, graduate of student teaching. I'm like, I got this, I can do this. And I went just full on drill sergeant on these kids. And I was like, you're going to sit at this desk, you're going to do these drills, you're going to do the next paper. And granted, I only had what was given to me from the school. So when I looked at let's say the math book, for example, it would show, this lesson was like 5 pages of, I don't know, let's say making tens. So it was like, 1 + 9, 2 + 8. And then the next page was making tens again. And then the third page was making tens again. And there was like 6 or 7 pages like that. And my kindergartner, I quickly realized, was like, I already know how to do this. This is ridiculous. Why are you making me, not only do I know how to do this, but you're making me do 7 pages of this. For what purpose? Like why? I get it. Like, can we move on? And so I started to kind of play around with, like, especially my kindergartner, I started to play around with this idea that, like, oh, you can like try something a little more challenging. And there were moments when I gave her something that was really hard and she could do it. And then there were times when I give her something really hard and she's like, just start crying. And then I was like, okay, well, maybe we'll back up a little bit. But eventually we found like our happy place, like what they would call your zone of development.
Yeah.
Like we found where she was at, but I don't know if she was in school, if they would have taken the time for that. I know they wouldn't have taken the time for
I
that.
was gonna say there's just no way. And the highest number of students I ever had as a classroom teacher was 36, and I did not have an aide. And I mean, I worked so hard, and kudos to all those teachers out there that work so hard trying to meet the needs of that many children. Kids slip through the cracks. They really do. It's just, I'm just being honest, it happens. They get what they need, but that extra attention, the challenges, no, they're just not there. And homeschool, you really can do that. So that's great. I love knowing all this background on you. I really want to talk today about homeschooling misconceptions, because they're out there. We've heard some doozies. I'm sure you have a few that you wouldn't mind bringing up. What's one homeschool misconception that if you could just like, take that magic wand and be like, take that one away. What's one of the ones that comes to mind?
Oh, sure. I mean, before we started homeschooling, and I think this is the number one misconception everyone has, is that your kid is going to be isolated, away from other children. They're going to be weird. They're going to be awkward. They're going to be socially inept. They're going to be just like not ready for the world. That's kind of I think that's what the world tells us about homeschoolers. That's unfortunately the stereotype I had in my own mind of friends who were homeschooling. And even though I knew their children and I saw how bright they were and that they were not socially inept at all, it was just this idea of like, well, it's because they're with my kids. There's always an excuse, right? It's because they're with my kids and they know my kids, we're neighbors or whatever. But like, they need to be socialized, right? They need to go out there and be with other kids their age, and somehow they're going to be missing this huge part of society if they're not in school. And yeah, that's not true at all. I found that.
Well, and it's so funny because back when Adam was in middle school and we were homeschooling, we homeschooled through the middle school years. But I was still a teacher. I was working part-time at the time. And I had to go on a campus of middle schoolers. There were 2,000, it was a campus of 2,000 students, all middle schoolers, right? 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And I was actually going there for a meeting after school, right after school had let out. And I remember going on that campus and being lost, not sure like where I was going. And some kids were like walking toward me and I was like, hi. And they wouldn't even look at me or talk to me. They were like, oh, like an adult. Right. And I'm like, could you guys help me? No, we got to go. I'm like, okay. And I keep walking and try and find some other kids who could help me. The fact that I couldn't I finally did, got a really nice girl walked me to the actual room that I needed. But as I left that day, I thought, really, just because you put your children on a campus with 2,000 students, you think they're going to be well socialized? Those kids weren't socialized enough to give an adult the time and respect to answer a question and direct me on their school campus. Like, versus at the charter where my son was, I worked with a lot of middle schoolers there. They could have a full-on conversation with me, eye to eye. And maybe that is weird. Maybe that's the weird that people are talking about, is that children in elementary can hold conversations with adults that are wonderful and respectful and courteous. And I mean, to me, I'll take that socialization any day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I currently just read something about that. It was like, well, what are we socializing our kids for? Like, how are we socializing them? And is it, like you said, they were able to have a conversation with an adult. So I found, because I found a group, and I do encourage people who are considering homeschooling, like, it is not isolating unless you make it isolating. Like, you absolutely could isolate yourself. You have to take risks, as you do with everything. But my children have made more friends as a homeschool family than they did in public school. And part of that is because we have made friends through our like interests. So for example, my kids go to like this gymnastics stuff. They find kids who are also into gymnastics and things like that, or they find kids who are also into like certain books. And then we start a book club with other moms or whatever. And you make your own homeschool experience, but it does take a little bit of effort.
Sure.
But it doesn't have to be isolating. In fact, once you step out of that sort of uncomfortable zone and you find other homeschoolers, and with Facebook, it's so easy to find a homeschool group. I personally am not on Facebook, but I know a lot of my homeschool friends are. And so from them, I kind of get like tips on where they're going to be or what they're going to do. And then we just kind of show up. But but then we also have like a group that we see so often that we've kind of created our own sort of like school where we're organizing our own field trips, and it's the same kids over and over. And we share certain values, and we share certain outlooks on life, and we share, sports interests, or, things like that. And so I find that my children are not always with the same age group.
Yes.
And the older kids, like my son, he's 4 and he's the only boy in our family. And when we go to like park days with our little homeschool group, there are teenagers, 10, 11, 12, and all the way up to like 18 that will all sort of like look after the little ones. They're all really kind. They have little brothers or little sisters. There's
a family value there.
Yeah. And then of course my son loves it because now he's kind of got like this like older brother type that he can be around. And the girls are kind of getting this role modelship from the older girls on how to behave. It's very wholesome and loving and wonderful. And I find that they're learning different things from the different age groups, which is nice.
Yes. Yes.
And they don't have that because they're just isolated by age in the school system. And I'm not bashing the school system at all. I just think that it's not effective. It's not efficient. It's not effective. And I see it working well for our family. So,
yeah. And, I used to truly believe that the traditional classroom experience was good for about 80 to 85% of the population. And that, maybe 15 to 20% did better in a homeschool environment. Nowadays, I feel like that's changing. And there are more families that would benefit from homeschooling than the classroom environment. And another thing to be said, like when you just mentioned that park experience, like the adults are there, right? You go on these campuses where students are let to just be on the playground, elementary, middle school, right? There's like one supervisor for every 100 kids. So they're not even being don't know if reprimanded or corrected is the right word. If something's going down and it's not right, I mean, this is why kids get bullied. They get away with things all the time. But in our
Yeah.
home communities, they're small. Everybody's looking out for everybody. It's the feeling of community. It's the feeling of family. It is so much safer. It feels so much more secure. And for families who want that, homeschooling has to be something they at least think about, consider, and certainly do some research on as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And going to that, what you just said, I found in this as a substitute teacher, more and more, you're not allowed to even really complain about bad behavior. And because you're not the parent and you don't know the child and the child doesn't know you and the parents don't know you, because you, even though it's your job to be there and you have the child's best interest at heart, there's this weird, like, you're still not allowed to say anything or do anything about it. So if you see, unless it's like severely needs to be stopped type of behavior, with our homeschool group, I would absolutely feel comfortable with an adult who saw my child maybe say something or do something inappropriate to say, excuse me, you don't do that, or, we don't talk like that here, or something, just to speak out. I would not be offended at all, because I would know that adult, and I would know that the child of that adult, and I know my kid because I've spent enough time with them now as a homeschooler that I could go, okay, yeah, I could see that. Because we always think our kids are like such perfect, like specimens of humanity, but then you spend some time with them, a lot of time with them, and you're like, no, I could see them maybe reacting a certain way, or maybe stepping outside of a rule or whatever. So,
well, I think that brings up another big and important misconception that we briefly had talked about, which was, hanging out with your kids all day long, every single day. I think there's a misconception out there that parents think that to homeschool, like that's what it means. Like you literally have to be in each other's faces all day long.
yeah.
But I would be curious, like, what would you say to that, to somebody who said, I just don't know that I would want to do that, or that I could do that?
Well, okay. So again, it's kind of something you control. So if you want your child at home isolated, then that's what you do. But then they're there and they're going to come to you for everything. What I found is, as the kids get older, so my oldest will be in 5th grade. She won't need as much of my time. I've now found a curriculum that works, that's sort of slowly giving her more independence to learn on her own. And that's awesome. That's a whole other conversation, but just giving her the book to read and say, okay, you're going to read these chapters, you're going to answer these questions, and then we'll talk about it. And then I can turn to my 2nd grader and work with her. And then she can go and go to her room if she wants. It doesn't bother me. Wherever she is comfortable reading that book, go right ahead. That's part of the fun of reading.
Yeah.
So, but being home with her all day, that is just something that, so yes and no. So in some ways we're always together, because we are, but we don't always have to be. So for example, we might spend, let's say, a Monday from 9 o'clock in the morning on and off, right? Because you stop for meals or just breaks or whatever. We might work from let's say 9 until 1 o'clock. And then we'll go to the park and meet up with some of our friends from 1 to 3 before, gymnastics starts or whatever. So from 1 to 3, we might be at the park.
Yeah.
And I'm chatting with my friend, the mom, and the kids are off just playing and doing whatever it is they want to do. And I don't know if I'm sure if you really think about it, you moms out there, when you're at a birthday party and your kids are off playing with a bunch of kids, the more kids, the less you have to do, really. It's like, wow, they're over there.
They're so creative. Yeah.
And that's kind of your break. Now, if you have something you have to do at home, that's a little different. I'm getting to a point with my group that I would feel comfortable maybe even dropping my kid off to play at someone's house or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
and I do have help with, like, my mom, she does help with the kids. So like right now I'm able to talk to you without interruption because my mom is watching the kids. But yeah, they're there, like your kids will be there, but you don't have to necessarily be in their face all the time. You kind of get into this like space where, like, even my 4-year-old, he's learned, and he's not even in my homeschool yet, but he has learned to, like, just watching the girls, to go off to the corner and just like play with his Legos for like an hour. And I'm like, wow, that's really great. I don't know if my oldest ever really did that for that long. So there's that. And then also, I just discovered this. There are resources out there where you can drop your kid off and they can take a class. So
charter schools especially, they have, which they've been fingerprinted and scanned, and they're credentialed to do what they're doing. Yep, approved.
Yeah. So for example, my kid loves to cook. We're going to take a cooking class. It's like, I don't know, 10 o'clock in the morning on like a Tuesday or something. And then I will take her to this facility and she can go with other children and learn cooking. And I will use my charter funds for it. And then, you know, depending on how you budget your time. So the way I did it is the kids all 3 of them will take 2 classes back to back. That gives me 3 hours to like run errands or whatever. And and like you said, they've been fingerprinted, and then they're around other kids. So if you're worried about it, you know, if you're worried about them socializing with children their own age, well, that's one way to like build a community, is this way. So
and that's what I'm seeing. There's so many more opportunities for learning. Like, this is just going to blow away what we used to be able to do in a classroom. When I see homeschooling families doing it right, learning about the things that are really interesting their children, that are keeping their kids engaged, tying that into a field trip, and the excitement for learning and the fun that they're having in their home. And don't get me wrong, and I know Jessica would agree with me on this, every day is not rainbows and butterflies. Some days are tough and some days are hard if you're not feeling well, or one of the kids isn't feeling well. Like, it's life, it's real life. It's going to have its ups, it's going to have its downs. But when I see that and I see homeschoolers doing it so well, I think they're running circles around what I could have ever done if their child was in my class of 36. Like, it's just so much better than what, and education needs to change. Everything else has changed. Everything else has changed in our world with technology. Gone should be the days of sitting in at a desk for 8 hours every day.
Well, and I will sort of transition to the other misconception that was even on my mind. And I just got my degree, which was this idea that I cannot teach my kids because I'm somehow, I don't know how to, like, you know, subtract fractions or something. You learn, and sometimes you teach your kid the wrong thing, and then you just go, okay, let's back up, and I messed it up, and let's try again. But then you find yourself getting smarter. Like, as an adult, I find myself, and I think I'm pretty smart, but I, you know, I'm not like a genius or anything, but I found myself going like, wow, okay. All right. So now I'm refreshing myself on certain things, or, you know, well, let's go learn this new thing together. My oldest is really into like government and economics. That's kind of been her thing. So I found if I give her something that is in comic book form, she will just read it till the pages fall apart. So we got her all these books that like are biographies, but they're written in sort of a silly kind of way, and she will read historical fiction. And so we have a lot of these conversations about things. And then we're looking at economics, and we're talking about economics, and then there's, you know, parent resources, and you're like, wow, okay, like now I'm learning about these things too, and then I can better than teach her. It's been a really great learning curve for me as well. And I find that, like you were saying, teaching in a classroom, you don't, that's not even that important. I mean, that does nothing for your homeschool classroom.
It is really limiting, and it does. So 2 things come up for me when just what you shared. One, I love that you said, like, you could be teaching something and then go, you know what, hun, like, that's wrong. We got to scrap that. We got to start over. what a brilliant opportunity for our children to see that we're not perfect and we're
Oh
not
yeah.
trying to be perfect, and that we can admit when we're wrong, so that they then become comfortable with who they are, and they can go, oh, you know what, mom, I did that wrong. Hold on, let me do that again. It really gives your learning space freedom to just be real and authentic and genuine in who you are. And I love that. And another misconception with that whole classroom thing. So here's a question you probably get from people who don't homeschool. Like, does it really take you 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours a day to homeschool? Like, I don't have 8 hours a day to homeschool, my fourth grader. Like, there's just no way. I can't do it. I don't have the energy, capacity, or time to homeschool for 8 hours a day. And I think that's probably what it takes.
So again, this is what you make of it. It kind of depends on your family. So with me, because I tend to go on tangents, that's my personality. So
Mhm.
I like learning, and let's say we're reading something in a book, and her lesson is about, I don't know, medieval times or something. I will stop the lesson, and because that's natural too, right? Your children will be like, hey,
Yes.
what is this? What's that? And they'll start asking questions, and you'll go like left field for like 30 minutes. And you're
Yes.
like, oh, well, I think we have a book on that. Let's go find out. And we'll go to the shelf and we'll pick out the book and we'll look at it. And the next thing I know, we haven't finished the lesson. It's been an hour and 15 minutes, but we learned about like butterflies somehow, or something totally random, but like we're still learning. We
Yes.
just took a left turn. And I find that's mostly with like our English language arts,
Yeah.
mostly is where we will take a left turn. But then we come back, and sometimes we have to like finish it the next day, or sometimes we'll finish it, or we don't finish it. If I'm like, well, we kind of understood the concept, let's just move on. Um, so for me, my lessons take longer just because we just get into it, and I just allow ourselves to have that time. But I'm getting better at saying, okay, well, we can maybe like write this on a post-it and look at it later. We really got to finish this lesson because there's an activity that's involved in this, and I really want you to get to this activity. So for me, with just I just had my two kids last year. It would take us about, realistically, we'd start around 10 because my son would have to go to preschool. He would go 3 days a week for a few hours. So dropping him off and coming back and getting everybody settled, we would probably start school around 10.
Mhm.
And then we'd break for lunch around 11:30, 12. And then we'd get back into it around 1, and we'd be done around 2:33.
Exactly.
But that also means I'd have to go pick up my son. So really, if you look at it, it's only a couple hours here and there, maybe an hour for math, an hour for English. And then if we were doing science, we would do an hour for science. And then just like throughout the rest of the day, if they were doing art or they were really interested in something, kind of like me, they would get a little obsessive over things. And so, for example, I like sewing, I like crafts and things like that. I would take out my sewing machine and I would teach them something. My oldest right now, that's all she wants to do. She's just obsessed with making like these little things on the sewing machine. So whenever she has free time, that's what she wants to do. If she's not TV, like she likes to watch TV too. But so during the school year, those are the kinds of things that I have to mitigate. Like, well, we can get to that after this lesson, or while I'm teaching your sister something, you can go work on your art project, or things like that. So it's really just kind of learning the flow of your kids and how hard it is to pull them away from things. But no, you do not need to spend 8 hours teaching your kid. You can spend, 3. It kind of depends. How many kids do you have? What are their ages and how much do they need? Like I said, this year, I'm really excited because my 5th grader is showing me that she can handle, if I give her an assignment, she can go do it. And so that gives me space to work then with my 2nd grader.
And it's also building her feelings of responsibility and independence. And I will tell you, back in the day when I used to make out my lesson plans for the week, it was an hour for math every day. And it was an hour and a half for language arts because it's so many things. And it was about 30 to 40 minutes science, and then 30 to 40 minutes history. And then we might get out for some PE. And the thing is, when you add all that up, that's just a handful of hours, really. But the thing is, when you teach in a classroom, there's so many disruptions. There's so many you have to head to the auditorium because there's another something or another going on, and then there's library day and computer day, and you need the whole days just to get that much done for that many people. But when you do it at home, like you, we could be done with everything that I wanted, plus some, like you said, going off tangent, 4 to 5 hours, easy breezy, like,
Yeah.
and then some. So,
And I find too that, like the way I explained it to my husband was, it's like I'm their private tutor. I mean, you would spend a good amount of money for an after school tutor if your kid didn't understand, let's say, a math concept,
true.
but here, not only am I giving individual attention, which is why, just side note, why the math lessons would take sometimes an hour or an hour and a half. It's because I'm doing 2 separate math lessons between 2 different groups. So I would bounce from one child and then like, you got this, okay. And then I would go to the next one and work on their lesson. And sometimes it meant reading all the stuff that's in the lesson book for them. And then it's like, there's a whole new concept for you, kiddo. And then now you have to do your practice. Yeah. And what's nice though, too, is that I see, oh, she's got it. Like, you don't even need to do the next lesson. We can just move on to the next concept. Yeah. Or, well, I don't think you understand this yet. Let me find some resources online for tomorrow. And then you'll just maybe do some, like, not necessarily busybody work, but work that will strengthen that skill for you. So they're getting what they need before they move on. Whereas my kids weren't getting that in school. They were like, okay, next thing, or they would spend too long on a topic or a concept. And it was just like, my oldest especially was that kid that was like, I'm done. And they're like, we just handed out the paper. She's like, I'm done. Okay, read your free time book because I can't help you right now. So, I mean, I still do that with her. If she's done, I say, okay, read your book until I can come back. Mm-hmm. But it's a little different because I'm not just telling her to just go away. I'm telling her, we'll work on the next thing.
Right. And you'll challenge her with the next tougher concept if she's ready for it. So again, I just think that's great. I think that's the ideal learning environment. I love these, Jessica. This is so good. So final thoughts before we go. If you knew right now that a new considering or maybe just started homeschooling parent is listening, what advice would you give them? What encouragement, or I don't know, just what thing would you say that would inspire them perhaps?
You're capable of doing it.
Yeah.
You're absolutely, they're your kids. I mean, they're your children. You're capable of doing it. And, yeah. And you're not alone. Like, there's so many of us out there, and we are so enthusiastic to help you to come to our side and homeschool your kids, because we love it so much and we want to share it with others. And I can't tell you how many conversations I have with women who are like, well, I'd love to do it. I'm like, do it. What do you need from me? I will help you, please. So yes,
encouraging environment. I agree with you. I agree with you. So encouraging, happy people too, right?
Yeah.
For the most part, like, we laugh a lot. Like, there's just a whole other level of life that we weren't experiencing until we decided to homeschool.
That's true. Yes.
Absolutely. Well, Jessica, I just want to thank you so much for your time, your thoughts, your wisdom, your experience. And thank you to everybody who listened in today. Be sure to subscribe and follow us if you would like to hear more homeschool interviews.